Good morning, everyone. I think we're ready to begin with what will be the only witness today. Is that right, Mr. McGregor? So, good morning. Good morning, Mrs. Sansbury.
Sansbury, that's correct, yes.
Now, as you know, you're about to be asked some questions by Mr. McGregor on my right. First of all, will you take the oath?
Yes.
Can I ask you, just sitting where you are, to raise your right hand and to repeat these words after me. I swear by Almighty God.
I swear by Almighty God.
That I will tell the truth.
I will tell the truth.
The whole truth.
The whole truth.
And nothing but the truth. Thank you very much indeed. Now, when you're giving evidence, you should get some help from that microphone in front of you, but it'd be quite helpful, certainly to me, because I'm a bit hard of hearing, if you perhaps speak a little louder than you would in normal conversation.
Right.
I don't know how long your evidence will take, but if we find ourselves at about 11 o'clock, I'll probably take a break for coffee. On the other hand, if at any stage you want to take a break in your evidence, just give an indication. We'll take a break whenever you wish.
Thank you.
Mr. McGregor.
Thank you. Mrs. Sansbury, could you tell the inquiry your full name, please?
Jacqueline Keir Sansbury.
Thank you. And you've provided a witness statement to the inquiry dated the 25th of April 2022, is that correct?
Yes.
Now, the content of that statement will form part of your evidence to the inquiry, but you're also going to be asked some questions today. I should make clear, it's not a memory test, so if you need to refer to your statement at any point, please do just let me know.
Right.
If I could just begin with some background questions. You obviously set out your career history from paragraph 2 onwards of your statement, including being project sponsor and then head of commissioning for NHS Lothian prior to retiring in 2019. And I want to come on and ask you in a bit of detail about those roles. But before we get there, am I correct in thinking that you began your career as a registered nurse between 1979 and 1994?
Yes.
And then thereafter, did you move into various project management roles?
Yeah, essentially, yes.
And was that all within the NHS?
Within NHS Lothian, yes.
So you eventually came to be what's referred to as head of commissioning for NHS Lothian. What did that role involve?
That role involved preparing and equipping the new hospital ready for occupation and preparing the staff in the old hospital for the move and how they would work in the new hospital and move it and the move itself.
So when approximately did you become head of commissioning?
Oh, well, trying to think. 2012, July 2012, 2013, so around about that time.
So around 2012, 2013. And am I right in thinking that you were a member of the NHS Lothian Health Board?
Prior to that, I was, yes.
And is that in the period from 2004 until 2012?
No, partway through the time I was Director of Planning, I was an executive member of the board originally, and that changed with the Scottish Government pilot. So I remained a board member, but not an executive board member.
And could you just explain to us what's the difference? Because, you know, again, we've heard the term the board or the board of NHS Lothian, and we've also heard terms such as the executive. Could you just explain to the inquiry roughly what the governance structures would be within NHS Lothian in terms of the board and the executive?
Right. The executive are the operational arm of the board through the day-to-day running of NHS Lothian, and the board is composed of the executive directors, some other directors and non-executive directors who are the non-executive directors are there in a governance role to make sure that the executive directors and the other directors carry out their role appropriately.
So you tell us within your statement that from 2004 until 2008 you're an executive director. So am I correct in understanding that that means that you're really dealing with the operational side within the board?
I continued to deal with the operational side. It was more about the responsibility of any. There's a difference between the executive director responsibility and a director responsibility, and I will struggle to give you it at the moment.
Okay, but you were in the executive director role up until 2008, and then from 2008 until 2012, you're still on the board,
Yes.
but not in an executive function.
Yes.
So is that effectively a non-executive part of the board?
No, it remains part of the operational arm. A non-executive is not a full-time employee. Who, you know, they are, and their role is governance. My role was still operational.
You're still fully on the board,
Yes.
but you don't have that extra level of responsibility in terms of being part of the executive driving the day-to-day decision making.
It's hard to explain. You are part of the executive. I remained part of the executive management team, but I can't remember when the pilot began, but there was a pilot to look at whether or not which executive members which posts should remain executive members. The Chief Operating Officer, the Director of Finance, the Chief Executive, the Director of HR, etc. They looked at all of those roles and tried to work out for the boards which ones should remain executive and which ones should not be. So HR and planning were removed from the executive part of the role and remained executive management team members, but not executive board directors.
So for the whole period, you're on the board in an executive capacity, but you're not called an executive director from a certain point in time?
Yes.
And then you retired in 2019, so you'll have retired before the Royal Hospital for Children and Young People and the Department of Clinical Neuroscience actually opened in Little France?
Yes.
Now, I want to ask you some specific questions about your involvement in the project. Now, whenever I'm referring to the project, I'm talking generally about the planning and implementation of the Royal Hospital for Children and Young People and the Department of Clinical Neuroscience. So you tell us in your statement that you become involved in 2006, and that's in your role as Director of Strategic Planning.
Yes.
So at that point in 2006, what are you doing?
With regard to the project?
With regard to the project?
I was overseeing a start of a project team, a very small project team who looked at preparing initial agreement and moving into the capital planning process. So there was a very small team at the beginning, and we had to prepare the documentation and then work out how we would run the project. So I oversaw that.
But effectively, if I understand you correctly, there's the idea that there would be a new children's hospital, and you're involved in the planning of that effectively from 2006 onward.
Yes.
Now, you mentioned in your statement that you were what you refer to as the project sponsor. What do you mean by a project sponsor?
There's a specific role in the capital planning manual for a project sponsor and the responsibilities that come with that. And it's laid out somewhere in the
We'll come on to it. I'm going to come on and look at the capital investment manual, but it's a technical term in terms of either Scottish Government or NHS policies, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now, before we come on and look at that, just in terms of exactly what that would mean, can you just give us a broad overview? So why 2006 was there a need for a new children's hospital in Edinburgh?
A number of reasons. There was a building that was no longer fit for purpose in terms of estate evaluation. There was a desire from, or a requirement from, I think, the Care and the Youngson reviews in Scotland for a new children's hospital. There had been concerns from, I think, the Bristol Heart Inquiry that a children's hospital should be co-located with an adult hospital, not built on its own. We needed to increase the size of the hospital because the age range of children who would be nursed in a children's hospital was changing from 13 to 16 and up to 18 for mental health. So there were a number of factors that made the existing property no longer fit for purpose for the services we move forward.
So effectively, old buildings no longer fit for purpose, and there needs to be a new facility built.
Yes.
Okay. Now, you'd mentioned slightly earlier in your evidence that the Scottish Capital Investment Manual, If I could ask you just to look within Bundle 3, Volume 2, Document 33 at page 120, please. So Bundle 3, Volume 2, Document 33 at page 120. Should be brought up on the screen. You see a document titled Scottish Capital Investment Manual Business Case Guide. See that?
Yes.
Okay. And is that a document that you're familiar with?
Yes. Well, I was.
Yes. Now, within that document, we'll see reference to terms such as initial agreement, outline business case, and full business case. We'll come on and look at that, but can you just tell us what your understanding of an initial agreement is?
An initial agreement is almost like a statement of intent where you lay out the reasons why you would want to do whatever it is you want to do in that, and how you plan to do it to gain approval to move to the stage of the outline business case. It has to be approved by the Scottish Government for you to carry on to an outline business case.
And when you're talking about approval, do you mean approval for government funding?
Yes, approval to move on to the next phase.
Okay. You have the embryo of an idea within NHS Lothian. You then have to put together an initial agreement. That initial agreement needs to be approved by the government. And then you said the next stage to move on to is the
outline business case.
Okay. So what are you doing at the outline business case?
The outline business case puts much more flesh on the bones than the original one. And it's a much more detailed document. I think you have copies of the outline business case, so it takes the project to the next level and looks at a much wider range of factors than the initial agreement would do.
And who needs to approve the outline business case?
In all of these documents, initial agreement, outline business case and full business case have to be agreed through the board first. NHS Lothian's governance processes. They also, because this hospital had a regional perspective, it had to be approved through other boards who would use the hospital, or whose patients would use the hospital. So, and then it has to be approved by the government. So,
and in terms of being approved by other boards, is that other health boards that might send children or patients to a hospital in Edinburgh as a centre of excellence, for example?
Yes, South East of Scotland and Tayside, Dumfries and Galloway are all boards who, for varying reasons, send people to different parts of Lothian, or different services in Lothian.
And then if you get through that stage, your outline business case is approved both by NHS Lothian and Scottish Government. You then said you'd move on to the full business case. Just in general terms, what's a full business case? A
full business case is a very detailed document that identifies costs, where funding, staffing, size, etc. of the building.
And again, who needs to approve that document?
It would be the same process. It would have to go through NHS Lothian's governance, SEAT Planning Group's governance and government.
And it's no doubt obvious, but if you get through that process and you get your full business case approved by the Scottish Government, what's then going to happen?
You proceed to appoint and build.
It allows you to actually take the project and build it out.
Yes.
Thank you. If we could look within the Scottish Capital Investment Manual, the business guide, to page 129, please. We see there, section 2, introduction. This guidance consolidates other reference sources and takes the business case author through the entire process from IA, OBC and FBC, so initial agreement, outline business case and final business case. The guide is accompanied by a set of templates prepared following many years of practical experience within a wide range of public sector organisations. It covers the content, presentation and structure of the business case and the standards which need to be applied. Do you see that?
Yes.
So again, in terms of the project for the new hospital, is this the guidance that NHS Lothian are looking at when they're producing initial agreement, outline business case and final business case?
Yes.
And then if we skip the next paragraph, the penultimate paragraph, states all projects submitted to the SGH Capital Investment Group for approval are now subject to an assessment of design, quality and functionality including technical and sustainability standards. This design assessment will take place at the initial agreement, outline business, full business case approval. What was your understanding of the design review process that was going to take place within this document?
The project spanned 2 different periods, and originally the business case was written for a children's hospital, and then when the government funding route changed, it became a joint build with DCN, and so those happened at different time periods, and so the guidance at the time, I think the 2 requirements are slightly different. As far as I can remember, we worked with ANDS to look at the design quality of the building. I cannot remember, I'm sorry, what stage that was. And my understanding is that Scottish Futures Trust also took a role in assessing the design when we moved to the joint funding arrangement later on, 2012 onwards.
You mentioned ANDS. What do you mean by ANDS?
Oh, Architecture and Design Scotland.
Okay. So just to be clear, whenever there's a reference here to there being an assessment of the design functionality, including technical and sustainability standards, to the best of your knowledge, the 2 bodies that are involved in doing that would firstly be Architecture and Design Scotland, and then latterly you said Scottish Futures Trust.
I think, in fairness, Architecture and Design Scotland were focusing on the design quality and functionality, but not the technical and sustainability standards. As I remember, I may be incorrect.
Again, I'm just asking for your understanding as someone that was on the board at the time, who it was that the board understood was assessing the technical standards of the design.
We had technical advisors supporting the project, and we also had the guidance documentation from Scottish Government that potential builders were required to use.
Okay. But again, you're saying Architecture and Design Scotland, did they have a major or a minor role in the technical assessment?
I can't remember them being involved in the technical section at all. I could be wrong.
And you said Scottish Futures Trust, again, was that a major or a minor role they were having in terms of reviewing the technical issues?
I honestly can't remember. I wouldn't be able to judge that, but they did a review when they moved to supporting us. They did a review of the whole project.
So they came in and did a review. And then you also mentioned that there was other technical advisors that had been appointed by the board to assist.
Yes.
I can ask you to look on, please, to page 141 of the bundle. Page 141, this should be headed up, Section 6, Responsibility for Producing the Business Case. See that? And it states, the ownership and responsibility for the infrastructure investment planning process rests with the NHS, page 141, the ownership and responsibility for the infrastructure investment planning process rests with the NHS Scotland body developing or leading the development of the programme/project in question. Do you see that?
Say that again, sorry, I'm struggling to find that bit.
So sorry, page 141.
Yes.
Section 6 at the top, responsibility for producing the business case, and then it begins the first full paragraph. The ownership and responsibility for the infrastructure investment planning process rests with the NHS Scotland body developing or leading the development of the programme/project in question. Do you see that?
Yeah.
So for the project we're talking about, that would be the board of NHS Lothian.
Yes.
Is that correct? Then continues, issues of governance are dealt with in the SCIM, Programme and Project Organisation Guide. For significant investments, NHS Scotland bodies should appoint a senior responsible officer for the project's direction at board level, as also recommended by the OGC Gateway process. The process should also involve the NHS body's board level environmental or sustainability champion, he promoted in the Environmental Management Policy Action 2008. So can you explain what's your understanding of the senior responsible officer's role within a project?
That was the role I carried out for the project. So I would be responsible for managing the project and taking decisions through the board's governance system.
Would it be an oversimplification to say it's someone that sits on the board that's a link between other parts of the project and the board itself?
No, that's probably fine.
So essentially, it's a mechanism to ensure that the board has its eyes and ears and open to what's happening in the wider project.
Yes.
Just returning to the next paragraph, it says, under no circumstances should responsibility for the direction of the production of the business case be outsourced to external consultants. See that?
Yes.
And in this project, was there any outsourcing of responsibility to consultants?
Not on preparation of any of the business cases, no.
But it continues saying, however, external consultants may be of invaluable assistance and their use should be considered where the necessary skills and resources are not available in-house. See that?
Yeah.
And throughout this project, were external advisors brought in?
Yes.
And it continues, similarly, the production of the business case should not be regarded as an adjunct to the project manager's role and a hurdle to jump for approval purposes. Instead, it must be viewed as a fundamental part of the overall business planning process, which requires advice and guidance from business managers and technicians involved in the scheme. Do you see that?
Yes.
And again, in your view, was that process complied with in relation to the business cases for the project?
Yes.
If I could ask you to look on to page 146, please. It should be headed up Phase 1, Business Planning and Scoping. You see that?
Yes.
And this deals with the initial agreement. In the overview section, it says the purpose of the initial agreement is firstly to establish the case for change and the need for investment, and secondly to provide a suggested way forward for the scheme for the early approval of management. Consequently, it provides the initial agreement to proceed with the scheme. Do you see that?
No, that's disappeared from my screen. Just trying to find it, I think.
No, that's fine. It's page 146, first paragraph beginning the purpose of the initial agreement.
Right there, yeah. Yep.
And would you agree with that? Is that essentially what you've summarised as being the purpose of the initial agreement?
Yes.
Now, I think you mentioned in your statement that the initial agreement would go to two bodies. The first you refer to is the executive management team. What's the executive management team and why is the initial agreement being sent to them?
The reason they would review it was to make sure that they were fully supporting the document, what our plans were. The executive management team would contain the medical director for the board, the nurse director for the board, the finance director, the HR director. So all of these people would have had an interest in what was going on. So I wanted to make sure, or any board would want to make sure, that all of these people are in support of the business case, at whatever stage it is at.
And you also mentioned that it would go to a body called the Finance and Performance Review Committee. Again, what's that body and why does the initial agreement go to that body?
NHS Lothian set up that committee to review financial aspects of their business. There were other committees that reviewed other aspects of their business. So anything that had a significant financial cost would have gone through that committee, and that committee had non-executive directors as well as directors on it. And that was to, again, make sure we got approval, appropriate approval.
If I could ask you to have in front of you, please, Bundle 3, Volume 1, Document 3, page 95. So that's Bundle 3, Volume 1, Document 3, page 95, which should be a document headed The Re-Provision of the Royal Hospital for Sick Children - NHS Lothian Initial Agreement. Do you see that? Is this the initial agreement for the project?
Yes.
And again, you tell us in your statement that you were involved in writing at least parts of the initial agreement.
Yeah, I'm not sure how much. There was a project manager and another person within the project who would have been writing it as well, and I would have overseen anything. Because that paper would have gone in my name through the governance process.
So in your role as senior responsible officer, is going out in your name You'll have input into it, but understandably a team of people will have assisted you.
Yes.
So if we look at the initial agreement, paragraph 1.1 says the purpose of this initial agreement is to request approval from the Capital Investment Group of the Scottish Executive to progress to the development of an outline business case for a proposal to re-provide the Royal Hospital for Sick Children in Edinburgh. This will be undertaken in line with guidance set out in the Scottish Capital Investment, which is the document we've just looked at. And it then sets out the background at section 3. So 3.1, the Royal Hospital for Sick Children in Edinburgh was built in 1805 and has had several structural developments over the following 100 years. The hospital and many of the surrounding houses, which are owned by NHS Lothian or endowments, are listed buildings. And then really the justifications continue thereafter in terms of the structure of the current hospital, justifications for why things need to change. So, for example, if we look onto the next page, to page 96, and to paragraph 4, fit with Lothian property strategy. Do you see that?
Yep.
It says the NHS Lothian property and infrastructure strategy, published in November 2005, identifies that the existing buildings comprising the RHSC are 56% non-compliant with fire. This is that fire regulations.
I would assume so.
It says 56% non-compliant with other statutory and non-statutory standards. Do you see that?
Yes.
69% of the property is not in an acceptable physical condition. So nearly 3/4 of the, or nearly 70% of the buildings are just simply not fit for purpose. 18% is deemed unfit for its present purpose. 7% of the hospital is overcrowded. Paragraph 4.2, this strategy therefore recognises that RHSC requires to be significantly modernised to provide an appropriate environment for continued delivery of high quality services. Account must be taken of changing patterns of care and rapid developments in clinical practice. It accepts that it is unlikely that this could be successfully achieved within the confines of the current site, and identifies that plans should be developed that will include options to locate the hospital. Now, just to be clear, for anyone that's not familiar with the old Royal Hospital for Sick Children at Sheens, why would it be difficult to redevelop the site there?
Because of the physical constraints. It was an old building. Much of the services were being provided from what were actually old villas in outside the building, and it has a school next door to it, so there was no expansion space left to expand.
And then if we look on just at the bottom of page 96, it says 5, fit with national and NHS Lothian health strategies. Then at page 97, I think you'd mentioned the Youngson report earlier in your evidence, is that correct?
Yes.
So is this the report you're referring to, the Youngson's report of
Yes.
2004? What's stated in the initial agreement is Youngson's report in 2004, produced for the Child Health Support Group, informed the work of the Specialist Paediatric Subgroup of the National Framework for Service Change, the CARE report 2005. Their recommendations included children's specialist acute services should be co-located with adult maternity and neonatal services. However, the district nature of children's services, as highlighted by the Bristol Inquiry Kennedy report, should be protected and preserved. Then secondly, this should be progressed as a matter of urgency in Edinburgh and Glasgow, for new co-located children's hospitals in Edinburgh and Glasgow are recommended. See that? And would it have been possible to have that co-location at the current or the existing site of the Royal Hospital for Sick Children?
No.
And then if we look on to page 100, that's confirmed at paragraph 7.5 of the initial agreement. So page 100, paragraph 7.5, the current configuration of services does not support the clinical and strategic drivers previously identified. Pathways of care require to be significantly redesigned. However, it is not possible to effectively deliver many of these redesigned services within the confines of the current hospital and adjacent buildings. There is therefore a requirement to re-provide the current RHC in order to deliver modern, fit-for-purpose health. See that?
Mm-hmm.
And then if we look on to page 102, I won't read all of them out, but if we look just below paragraph 9.2, that there's various benefits to patients set out? Just take a moment to familiarise yourself with that. And can you just summarise in the initial agreement what you saw the benefits to the patients being?
Well, the facilities, they would have updated facilities. They would be co-located with other services which were felt that they fitted well together with. It would allow us to increase the age range and have sufficient capacity and appropriate facilities to increase the age range. And it would also allow the development of an acute assessment unit, which they didn't have in the old building because it wasn't possible to have that. So it would allow them to redesign their pathways to suit a better way of managing patients through the hospital.
Now, if I can ask you to look on to page 109, please. You should see an organisation chart. Would you see that?
Yes.
If we could maybe just take it in stages, obviously we've got NHS Lothian board at the top.
Thanks.
Below that we've got, I think, what you've already described as the executive management team. But just for completeness, could you explain how that executive management team's linking in with NHS Lothian in terms of the chart?
I thought I'd already done that, sorry. The executive management team report to the board, and the board contains the executive management team and the non-executive directors.
So you could almost draw a line round both of those because they're the same, they're all on the board. There's just almost a level of management within the board, is that correct?
Well, the board has the benefit of the non-executive directors for governance overview.
And then below that we've got strategic change programme board. What was that?
We had a number, I think that was set up because we had a number of developments going on at once, but as I'm sitting here, I can't remember the detail.
And then below that it says ICIC executive. What was that?
ICIC was Improving Care, Investing in Change, which was the name given to the 2005 Acute Services Strategy in Lothian. And it involved moving services around Lothian to better locate them to meet things like the Working Time Directive and the need for highly specialist things to be located together, etc. And it changed where some of the services were in Lothian. So we moved things from one site to another.
And then below that we see operating division management team. What was that?
That was the operating division. The Lothian Health Board was split into primary care. We had, trying to think at the time of this, whether we had local LHCCs, local healthcare partnerships. We had the acute division. We had various parts of the service delivery, so that the operating division management team would be a part that oversaw the acute services.
And then below that we have Royal Hospital for Sick Children Re-Provision Project Board. What was the project board? The project board was a board that I chaired, which had stakeholders on it from appropriate stakeholders from wherever they needed to come from. Some of them would have come from CAT boards, some of them would be parents and family representation, some would be from primary care, some secondary care, from various parts of the paediatric services. So they would come from people covering estates and facilities, so that we had, so all the parts of the hospital that we were going to re-provide, we had representation from on that board. And then just slightly below that, we've got the technical resource group. Was that an internal to NHS Lothian group or an external group? It was an internal to Lothian group that was set up to support ICIC, the Improving Care, Investing in Change, and I can't remember any more details of that. Looking at that, I'm sorry. And then below that, we've got the core project team. So what was the core project team and how did it differ from the project board? The core project team were the team who essentially did the work and reported through to the project board, and the core project team would have had representation from the Children's Services Directorate. And then below that in purple, we've got a range. So on the left-hand side, we've got Clinical Advisory Service Redesign. What would they be doing? That would be a group of clinical staff, from medical staff, nursing staff,
professions allied to medicine, pharmacists, etc., looking at how the services should be re-provided in the new hospital, what the pathways should be, and advising the project board of essentially how that hospital should run from a patient's perspective.
And then beside that, we've got a business case development group.
Yep.
What would they do?
Prepare the business case.
And then beside that, infrastructure design and construction.
That would be around about the hospital, the design of the hospital buildings and the technical issues.
And then workforce redesign.
That was about how we would need to redesign the workforce to deliver the new services. There were new rules for, at that time, we were trying to manage junior doctors' hours in line with the European Working Time Directive, and we were developing rules for other people to pick up some of that work to enable us to reduce the hours of junior doctors' work. So there was expansion of rules for senior nurses, and that worked its way down to support workers taking on expanded roles. And we looked at perhaps practitioners working, nurse practitioners working slightly to the side to support doctors in some of what they did.
And then the final one is Child and Family Advisory Board. What was its role?
Its role was to input to the project, and that was a specific work stream that allowed them to be kept up to date and input to the project as it moved forward.
The next document I'd like you to look at, please, is the outline business case. So that's in Bundle 3, Volume 1, Document 12, page 272. So Bundle 3, Volume 1, Document 12 at page 272. Is that the outline business case? And if we look in the bottom left-hand corner, it's from 2008.
Yep.
So if I could ask you to look on, please, to page 275. So am I right in thinking the initial agreement gets approved, and then you've at this stage produced obviously the outline business case? And is this just a slightly more detailed version of the initial agreement in terms of setting out the justifications for the new hospital?
Yeah, that first part there is it's expanding on what we'd done in the initial agreement.
Again, at page 275, setting out the fact that there's inadequate and unsuitable premises for the facilities, and then the fourth bullet point, to ensure the most efficient and effective use of resources to support service modernisation and development. Was that really what was behind the project, modernisation?
Yes.
I could ask you to look on to page 282, please, into paragraph 2.11.4. And it says the key themes from the responses include support for the following. And it says combination of single rooms and bed bays within the wards. Do you see that?
Yes.
So from 2008, it was always planned that there was going to be a mixture of single bed and multi-bay rooms within the new hospital.
Yes.
And can you just explain why was that?
There are various reasons why in some services it's more appropriate to have multi-bed bays than others. Young children are unable to press buzzers to get assistance if they were in a single room on their own. When winter is busy, it's sometimes helpful to be able to cohort children or babies with the same illness in a multi-bed bay to allow for observation. Older children, where it was felt that adolescents should have a single room rather than be in a multi-bed bay, but younger children, it helps their socialisation to be in mixed rooms. So there, some patients need to be isolated for infection control purposes, others don't. So there were a number of different groups of patients going through the Children's Hospital that were looked at, and input was taken from parents, children, families, medical and nursing staff, etc., to look at what the best solution would be. And the view was it would be a mixture.
The inquiry's already heard evidence from Janice Mackenzie. Did you work with Janice Mackenzie in relation to that aspect of the project?
I wasn't involved in the subgroups that were doing that. Janice did that, but I was aware, you know, we commissioned them to do that work because we wanted to know whether we were going to go for 100% single rooms or not. So
that work would have been done by Janice Mackenzie and the team that she's working for.
And the project team.
And the project team. And then that's reported back to you as Senior Responsible Officer, which then makes the board aware of what the clinical team and the patients and families consider is important in terms of the makeup of the hospital.
Yes.
And just then returning to the outline business case, do we see on page 283 at the bottom that the business case would have to be signed off by the Chief Executive, Director of Finance, and also by you in your capacity as Director of Strategic Planning and Modernisation?
Yeah.
And then if we could look on, please, to page 286. Again, I won't read it all out, but from section 4 onwards, we really see again that the background that was set out in the initial agreement being built upon. The first sentence, the RHSC was built in 1895 and has had several structural developments over the last 100 years. The hospital and many of the surrounding houses, which are owned by NHSL or NHSL endowments, are listed buildings, and so it continues. And again, is that really just setting out the detail of what you've summarised to the inquiry in terms of buildings that are not fit for purpose, not complying with fire regulations, and unable to link into all of the requirements that had been set out in documents such as the Youngson report?
Yes.
If I could ask you to look on, please, to 294. This is really starting to draw together some of the analysis that's headed before. 5.4.3, the Estates Building Survey indicates the costs of upgrading the building to ensure the compliance of the existing hospital with statutory requirements as a certain sum. And it continues, the age and fabric of the building and the layout of patient facilities makes it difficult to achieve the required infection control standards to provide adequate isolation or barrier nursing to facilities, maintain standards of cleanliness. See that? So was that part of the justification as to why the old hospital wasn't suitable?
Yes.
And then again, just for completeness, if we look to page 295, paragraph 5.5.3, again, there's an analysis of Youngson's report and why that would be relevant to the potential movement to a new site. Is that correct?
Yes.
If I could ask you to look on, still within the outline business case, to page 426, please. See that this is headed up section 6, future service provision, 6.3, single room accommodation report.
Yes.
So this was effectively an annex to the outline business case. What was your understanding of this single room accommodation report? What was its purpose?
It was to explain why we wanted a mixture of single rooms and multi-bedded bays.
And is that for all the reasons that you've already given us in your evidence?
Yes.
Thank you. Am I correct in thinking after 2008 there was then a further outline business case that had to be produced in 2012?
Yes.
Why was that?
That was when we added the DCN building to the sick children's building, and we needed to go back to an outline business case.
In terms of all of the justifications that we've looked at in terms of the 2008 outline business case, had anything of substance changed by the time we got to 2012 in terms of the justifications?
No, not really.
So, for example, within the revised outline business case, if we look to page 737, Volume 3, Bundle 2. Document starts at page 672, but if we could look to page 737. Do we see there, section 6, management case? This section describes the management arrangements for the project, including the governance structure, procurement strategy, project management arrangements, including post-project evaluation. Do you see that?
Yes.
And then if we look to the figure in section 6.3, it's slightly slimmed down in terms of what we saw at the initial agreement stage, but is it broadly the same in terms of NHS Lothian Board at the top? We now have a finance and performance review. What was that?
That's the subcommittee of the board of NHS Lothian Board that deals with financial issues that have financial implications for the board.
We've then got the executive management team that you've already told the inquiry about. Then below that, we've got capital investment group, strategic planning group, and ICIC executive. Is that effectively the bodies that we've looked at previously in terms of the initial agreement?
Yeah, I think the capital investment group wasn't on that last one, and that was a group that was set up because there were a number of things going on, as well as this children's project and the DCN. There were changes going on inside the Royal Infirmary that would have to happen to allow us to co-locate the children and DCN onto that site. So there were a number of enabling projects on the Royal Infirmary, clinical and non-clinical, and that group would oversee that. And
again, the inquiry's heard evidence that that's because there was a public-private partnership agreement in terms of the Royal Infirmary. Is that correct? Did that add issues that had to be dealt with by the capital investment group?
Yes, well, yes, yeah. But those issues would also flow right up the way to the NHS board.
And then below that, we've got the project board, project management executive, and then the workstream leads and the workstream groups below that. If I could ask you to look on, please, to page 740. So from paragraph 6.28 onwards, we see really the detail of what you've just summarised being unpacked in terms of, for example, what project management is and what's going to be done?
Yes.
And then below that at 6.29, we see the various responsibilities for the NHS Lothian Board. Is that correct?
Yes.
And then at paragraph 6.30, we've got the responsibilities of the project board.
Yes.
It says the project board is held monthly and includes the key stakeholders for the group. It is chaired by the project sponsor, who reports directly to the board's chief executive for the delivery of the business benefits of the project. You see that?
Yes.
So at this time, you would be chairing that project board and then reporting to the board of NHS Lothian.
Yes, I think so.
And then if we look down on the next page, page 741, at paragraph 6.33, see project team responsible for the day-to-day delivery of the project from outline business through procurement of the MPD partner. The FB stage reports directly to the project board and is comprised of, and then there's a list of individuals that comprise the project team.
Yes.
Then if we look on to page 743, please. We see there a table with a whole list of roles. So, for example, project sponsor that you've talked about has ultimate responsibility for the project and leads the project board, providing overall direction and management for the project. You see that? And again, if we went through that, it sets out the role of effectively a number of key individuals within the project.
Yes.
If you look onto page 744, paragraph 6.45, it states Mott MacDonald was appointed as the lead consultant and technical advisors via the standard OGC Buying Solutions Framework Agreement in March 2011. They will deliver the following services: NPD procurement advice, facilities management advice, and design and construction advice.
Yes.
Can you just explain what your understanding was of the role that Mott MacDonald were going to provide in the project at this stage?
Well, they were supporting NHS Lothian's project team in the development of the design for the hospital and supporting us in advice for the three items outlined there: procurement, facilities, and design and construction.
Were they the key technical advisors at this point?
They were the project technical advisors, but in all our project teams, we would have had technical people from NHS Lothian involved. So if there was a need for something to be reviewed or of a technical nature, we would bring in the right persons, as we would have done with the clinical, anything clinical. So we had people who worked in our own NHS facilities and estates department who would help us review things as well.
Thank you. Just to return to the single bed issue for a moment, the inquiries heard evidence that there was a move at this point, so really going up to 2010 towards having near 100% beds within new build hospitals. Can you assist the inquiry? Was that your understanding at the time?
Yes.
But there could be a clinical justification for a departure from 100% single rooms. Is that correct?
Yes.
And again, your understanding was that at this time that the projects are being approved, that there was the clinical justification for departure from 100% single bedrooms.
Yes, and at this time in children's, the decision to depart for DCN came very slightly later.
Was approval from the Chief Medical Officer received in relation to a departure from that standard policy of 100% single bedrooms? So if we start with Royal Hospital for Children and Young People.
Yes, it was. Unfortunately, since I have left, nobody can find the documentation, but I received approval from Dr. Harry Burns, who was the Chief Medical Officer at the time.
Okay. So although no documentation can be found, was there written approval that was provided?
I think so. The likelihood is, I had not met Dr. Burns. The likelihood is I would have written to him. I suspect it would have been typed by my PA and received back, and she would have hard filed the letter. NHS Lothian has moved accommodation since then from Deaconess House to Waverley Gate, and the correspondence can't be found. But I can confirm I received approval to derogate, and had I not, the 2008 business case would not, OBC outline business case would not have been approved.
So for the reasons you've given, the document can't be found, but your position would be that the outline business case simply couldn't have been approved if there hadn't been the derogation from the Chief Medical Officer?
Yes.
Now, in relation to the Department for Clinical Neuroscience, was that originally meant to be 100% single bedrooms?
Yes.
Did that change?
Yes.
And can you explain why did that change?
Again, the clinicians felt that there was a need to have some multi-bedded area. The model of care that they had designed, where people would come in and be nursed in the equivalent of an acute receiving area, they felt would be better if it was multi-bed and could be rather than single rooms, because you would have potentially very sick people, and it's easier to monitor them in a multi-bed bay than it is in a set of single rooms.
So again, you're understanding a clinical justification for a departure from 100% single bedroom.
Yes, there's a document which outlines the clinical reasons for that, the same as there is for children's, and there is the documentation for that approval was actually on my emails. I had met Harry Burns by then, and I felt it was appropriate to use email rather than formal letter.
So again, I'll take you to that email so that there's no doubt. So if we could look within bundle 4, please, page 186, and we're looking at the very bottom of page 186, and then we're just going to go on to page 187 shortly. So it would be bundle 4, page 186. And at the very bottom, we should see an email from Jackie Sansbury to Mike Baxter. Do you see that?
Yes.
Thank you.
So bundle 4, page 186, at the very bottom, email of the 15th of July. Dear Mike, please find enclosed a short paper outlining the justification for requesting a derogation to the existing single bed guidance. As you know, the outline business case for the new children's and DPN hospital included provision of 77 neuroscience beds, all of which were in single room accommodation. The configuration was 19 neurology wards, 24 neurosurgery ward bed, 24 level 1 beds for acute assessment, and immediate post-op care prior to transfer to the inpatient wards, with a planned LOS likely to be up to 24/48 hours. Then below that, 11 level 2 and 3 beds in RIE critical care units. The area we would wish to make changes to is the DCN acute care ward. The clinicians wish to have 2 4-bed wards in this, allow for greater observation of agitated patients. Document gives details of the case mix required observation. As you know, this change was supported by David Farquharson and Melanie Hornet. Who are they?
The medical director and nurse director for NHS Lothian.
And the email continues, it would be very helpful to have Harry's position on soon, as this is an alteration to the reference design. It has to be communicated to bidders. Do you see that?
Yes.
And did you receive approval from the Chief Medical Officer?
Yes.
Yes. So if we look back up to page 186, so bundle 4, page 186. This is an email from Chief Medical Officer to Mr. Baxter. States, Mike, clinical arguments perfectly fair to me, and I would support the case. That's bundle 4, 186.
Sorry, did you say 196?
186.
Right, thank you. And did you describe that as an email?
It's an email, yes. So
Right.
bundle
Find
4,
it, find
page.
it in due case. Find it in due course.
I'd just like to ask you some questions now about the proposed funding for the new hospital, the Royal Hospital for Children and Young People. Was that initially going to be funded by way of capital funding from central government?
Or which part?
For the Royal Hospital of Children and Young People?
Children's was to be capital funded, yes.
Yes. Did that change?
Yes, it changed in, gosh, I think maybe 2010, 11. There was an announcement in the budget which changed the funding route.
And did NHS Lothian have any advanced warning that that change was going to take place?
No.
Did that surprise you?
Yes.
Why were you surprised?
Because we thought we had capital funding for it, as we had an approved business case.
What then happened? There's no longer any capital funding. What happened to the project in terms of funding?
We had to regroup and work out what that meant, but the announcement, the budget that day also included the re-provision of DCN in that announcement, which we prior to that had no approved funding for. So this allowed us to move forward with a joint building with Children's and DCN in it.
And how was it going to move forward in terms of funding?
Well, it would be funded, it would be revenue funded.
And what do you mean by that? Just obviously, I think everyone will understand capital funding that comes from central government, but what do you mean by revenue funding?
It was, use old terminology, it would be a PFI.
There's going to be private money that comes in to allow the hospital to be built.
Yes.
I could ask you please to have a board paper within bundle 3, volume 2, at page 314. Bundle 3, volume 2, page 314. In the top left-hand corner, it should have Lothian NHS Board. Do you see that?
Yes.
Thank you.
And it says Finance and Performance Review Committee from the 12th of January 2011.
Yes.
Director of Finance and Chief Operating Officer. So this is effectively a project update that's being provided. Do you see that?
Yes.
Paragraph 1.1. The purpose of this report is to provide Finance and Performance Review Committee with an overview of the progress made over recent weeks to review the Royal Hospital for Sick Children and Department of Clinical Neuroscience reprovision projects following the Scottish Government announcement on 17th November 2010. These projects would be funded under the non-profit distributing model. Do you see that?
Yes.
Now, again, you called it a BFI project or revenue funding. Whenever we see references to NPD, should that be understood as a shorthand that it's revenue funding that's coming in?
It was an updated PFI model that was used in Scotland.
Thank you. And then if we look to section 2, it says recommendation that the committee is invited to. Can you just explain how these board papers would work? So this is a paper that's provided, that's put before the board, but there's obviously various recommendations that would be made. Why is that process adopted?
Sorry, I don't understand the question.
Well, it's just obviously there's a paper that's been produced that's being put in front of the board. I'm just trying to understand how the board operates. Obviously, the paper is making various recommendations to it. Is that a standard procedure that's adopted, or was this unusual?
Yes, no. Quite often papers would go to the board with a recommendation for board approval. This has gone to the Finance and Performance Committee for approval. So the board papers always start out with what the recommendations are, and then they go on to discuss the detail of the text later on.
So if we look at 2.1, the committee is invited to, and then at the second bullet point, approve progressing with a detailed reference design for a combined project is a key component of the NPD procurement route, utilising either the current framework contract with BAM or by procuring the design team the Office of Government and Commerce procurement solution. Can you help the inquiry? What's the mention of reference design there? What was your understanding of a reference design?
The reference design was a way to utilise the work that had gone on in the time up until this point with clinical teams about how they wanted the hospital to manage. We'd been working with clinicians in the sick children since 2006, and we didn't want to lose all that work and all their input and start again. So the reference design allowed us to use the models of care that they had suggested and developed rather than starting back at the beginning. Really to save some time and to utilise all the work that had previously been done.
And can you remember at this point in time who was suggesting to the board that it should be a reference design? Where did that idea come from?
I can't remember. Okay. Sorry.
Could I, just for the sake of my note, Mrs. Sansbury, your understanding of the reason why it's progressing with a detailed reference design. Now, you've said to utilise all the work, and I also picked up use the models of care. Can I maybe just ask you again, just to, from your perspective, just mention the things that you thought the reference design could capture as at 2011. I mean, what was to be utilised?
Things like clinical adjacencies. So when we had been looking at the previous standalone building, there were important that some wards were located along beside other ones or beside support departments. And we didn't want to lose all that work that had gone on. The clinicians had also described how they saw patients flowing through the hospital from admission to discharge and what their pathway should be via various departments. And so we didn't want to lose that work. It was all important work and had taken some time to generate.
Anything else?
Not off the top of my head,
Right.
sorry.
Thank you very much. Sorry, Mr. McGregor.
If we could return to page 314, section 2.1, and if I could ask you to look at the fourth bullet point, 2.1, fourth bullet point, starting, approve the commencement of a tender. Do you see that?
Yes.
So another recommendation is to approve the commencement of a tender process to appoint advisors, technical, legal and financial, in addition to the advisory assistance provided by SFT. Do you see that?
Yes.
Again, can you assist in inquiry what assistance is being provided by Scottish Futures Trust at this point?
They were overseeing the project and reviewing work to date to check that we had covered all the bases, I assume, and to check that we're comfortable with the direction of travel.
And what are they helping with? Are they helping with the financial model, what's being referred to as the NPD model?
They were helping with a number of strands of work, and they would, as it says here, they were supporting us with technical, legal and financial.
So your understanding was Scottish Futures Trust is helping with technical, legal and financial matters?
Yeah, oversight of.
And then if we look over the page onto page 315, the final bullet point at the top of the page, note that the proposed structure of the project team and a more detailed assessment of additional advisor costs will be brought back to the committee in February. Do you see that?
Yes.
So effectively that's going to be an ongoing process of bringing these matters before the board.
Yes.
We look to section 3, summary of issues, and if we look to paragraph 3.3, this has brought a number of significant challenges as well as complex legal, technical and procurement issues, given the existing relationships with our key commercial partners, BAM as principal supply chain partner under Framework Scotland, and Consort Health as the PFI provider on Little France site, with a legal right to the land under the structure of the existing project agreement. Further details on progress are set out in sections below. Again, could you just explain what was the problem in terms of Consort being on the site and it being part of a private finance initiative?
Consort essentially had the rights to that land for a period of time, and we needed to use some of that land to put the hospital on. And so we had to negotiate with Consort to release that land, and we had to purchase additional land to give them back as we moved a car park, and so we re-provided a car park elsewhere on that campus to release car park B for the site for the hospital.
As I understand it, you've got the site at Little France that's a revenue-funded project, a PFI project, whatever you call it, and you're then going to take another revenue-financed project and put it within it. So a revenue-financed project within a revenue-financed project. Can you just explain some of the perceived complexities and difficulties that the Board of NHS Lothian were grappling with that type of project?
I'm probably not the best person to tell you all of that, but it required a lot of negotiation because of the contract, the PFI contract that was in place. And so the negotiations had to make sure that we didn't disadvantage Consort by taking over land that had previously been theirs for their use.
Thank you. Now, I said it wasn't a memory test. So in terms of what the NPD model was, if I could ask you to look at section 4, which says background to NPD, states here, an NPD non-profit distributing project is a distinct type of public-private partnership. Under an non-profit distributing model, or NPO, non-profit distributing organisation, private company limited by shares is established, a special purpose vehicle, or SPV, to enter into a design, build, finance, maintenance contract with the public sector body. There's private sector participation and expertise to deliver public sector infrastructure. Unlike traditional private finance initiative PFI projects, the organisation's profits cannot be distributed in the usual way and must be reinvested by the organisation. The model aims to retain the benefits of revenue finance, such as optimal risk allocation between the public and private sector partners and performance-based payments, while removing the potential for excessive profits. Do you see that?
Yes.
So was that the understanding of the board of NHS Lothian at this time in terms of what an NPD project was?
Yes.
Then continues paragraph 4.2. To date, there is only one NPD project underway in NHS Scotland, a mental health development in NHS Tayside. Dialogue is already underway with colleagues in NHS Tayside, in particular to highlight any lessons learned. See that?
Yes.
Were you involved in discussions with NHS Tayside?
No.
Do you know who was involved from NHS Lothian's side in those discussions?
I would imagine it would be Susan Goldsmith and Brian Curry, the project director and the director of finance.
Did they report back to you any lessons learned from those discussions?
I honestly can't remember, but in fairness, the NHS Tayside project was different because it wasn't putting an NPD on a PFI site. And at the time, we didn't know of any other project that was doing that.
So this was effectively a brand new project for NHS Lothian?
Yes.
If we could look on, please, to page 318, to section 6, procurement options. You see that says 6.1. We have an objective to minimise both the delay to the programme, also the Cabinet Secretary's aspiration, and the abortive and ongoing costs. Ensure operational effectiveness going forward, and also to manage the overall site consistent with the aims of the BioQuarter development. Do you see that?
Yes.
So aims being minimised delay and abortive costs. But it also says that that's the Cabinet Secretary's aspiration. Had you had any discussions with the Cabinet Secretary in relation to this?
Not personally, no.
But there's obviously a statement within this paper that there had been discussions. Do you know who would have had those discussions?
No.
Do you know did you ever get a summary at board level of what those discussions had been?
Not any more than that.
Just simply what was put in here is all that the board would have known.
Yes.
And then at paragraph 6.2, it continues: to achieve this, we have explored the procurement options, both SFT and SGHD. So is that discussions with both Scottish Futures Trust and the Scottish Government?
Yes.
For an NPD model to deliver RHSC and DCN, with our ideal being to have utilised the existing design team, complete the design process, build on the market testing of packages already undertaken, and construct the new building, option 2 below. Do you see that?
Yes.
And then it continues, section 6.3, there's various options for procurement being set out. If we look on to paragraph 6.4, please. And if I could ask you to look just 4 lines up from the bottom of paragraph 6.4. 4 lines up from the bottom of 6.4. Do you see a sentence beginning, although this decision requires to be made?
Yes.
Although this decision requires to be made by NHS Lothian as the statutory authority, it will be important that this is endorsed by Scottish Futures Trust and Scottish Government. See that?
Yes.
So again, can you just explain your understanding as someone who was on the board at the time of just how this process was working? Because this is telling us that NHS Lothian is the ultimate decision maker, but really there's got to be a role for Scottish Futures Trust and Scottish Government. What was your understanding of the roles of those three parties, so NHS Lothian, Scottish Futures Trust and Scottish Government?
I think what the roles of them were to work collaboratively to work out the best way for us to do this. It hadn't been done before, as I said, and I think what we were looking for was support and guidance in the best way to do this. None of us had done this before.
And then within page 320, section 7, timetable implications, do you see that?
Yes.
7.1, early SFT advice indicates that there could be up to months programme delay with associated costs. We are doing all we can to ensure that any delay is minimised and believe that the project can be completed by 2050. Key target is to conclude the agreed way forward with the board in March. Do you see that?
Yes.
So again, was the board understanding at this time there's been a change in the funding model, there's going to be a delay to the project?
Yes.
Sorry, Mr. Gregor, my fault. Are we now on page 319?
Page 320, my lord.
Okay.
And I'd gone to two sections. So firstly, paragraph 6.4, 4 lines up from the bottom. And then the latest section I was looking at, section 7, and particularly paragraph 7.1, beginning early SFT advice.
Thank you.
Then if we look on, please, to page 322, we see governance arrangements, 322, section 10, governance arrangement, 10.1, Scottish Government and Scottish Futures Trust have confirmed their willingness to work with the board's team developing the business case requirements to minimise the programme but retain the appropriate governance. This will necessitate significantly more ongoing engagement than might normally be the case. See that?
Yes.
And again, is that referring back to what I think you referred to earlier as a collaborative approach?
Yes.
And we see that this paper was produced by yourself as Chief Operating Officer, but also by Susan Goldsmith. Who was Susan Goldsmith?
Director of Finance for NHS Lothian.
Mrs. Sansbury, there's just a few more documents that I'd ask you to look at, and they're really just to see if you can assist the inquiry. These are documents that other individuals that have given evidence to the inquiry have spoken to. So the first document that I'd like you to look at is in Bundle 1 at page 333, please. So this is a document, top right-hand corner, produced by NHS National Services Scotland, called SHTM00, Best Practice Guidance for Healthcare Engineering Policies and Principles. Do you see that?
Yes.
Have you ever seen this document before?
I will have seen it, but it wasn't part of my remit at any stage in the detail of it, so I'm not qualified to speak on it at all, I'm afraid.
Do you ever remember this document being discussed at board level at any point during the project?
No.
When I'm talking about the board, I should be clear, I mean the actual board of NHS Lothian firstly.
NHS Lothian Board?
Yes, was it ever discussed
not
there?
that I'm aware of. No.
And was it ever discussed on the project board?
No, that it would be discussed in technical meetings.
So when you say it'd be discussed in technical meetings, would that be really the external advisors that would be dealing with this?
No, it would be sub meetings of the project.
But at no point did anyone ever raise anything within this type of document with you in your position as senior responsible officer?
No.
If I could just ask you to please look on to page 340 of the document. And if I could ask you to look, there's a bold heading, aim of the guidance. Do you see that?
Yes.
It says, the aim of Scottish Health Technical Memorandum 00 is to ensure that everyone concerned in the management, design, procurement and use of the healthcare facility understands the requirements of the specialist critical building and engineering technology involved. Do you see that?
Yes.
And then if we skip the next paragraph, you see there's a paragraph beginning only by having a knowledge. Do you see that?
Yes.
So it says only by having a knowledge of these requirements can the healthcare organisation's board and senior managers understand their duty of care to provide safe, efficient, effective and reliable systems which are critical in supporting direct patient care. When this understanding is achieved, it is expected that in line with integrated governance proposals, appropriate governance arrangements would be put in place, supported by access to suitably qualified staff to provide this informed client role which reflect these responsibilities. Do you see that?
Yes.
Have you ever heard that term, informed client role, before today?
Not that I'm aware of.
So should the inquiry understand that when this document states that only by having a knowledge of these requirements can the healthcare organisation's board and senior managers understand their duty of care, that whatever's within this document wasn't known to the board of NHS Lothian at the time the project was being carried out?
Individual people on the board will have known this document existed and were aware, and the contract that we entered into required that the technical advice notes and advisory notes from these documents were used in the project, and the project board will have taken comfort from the fact that NHS Lothian's project team used its external and internal advisors to cover these issues.
Am I right in thinking that you sat on the board and you didn't know about this guidance until today?
Well, I'm well aware of the technical advice notes and all the guidance notes. Yeah, I hadn't read that paragraph. I wasn't aware of that paragraph, but I was well aware that we used those, and the contract covered us for those all being a contractual requirement.
It's just you said people on the board would have known about this. So who are we talking about? Who in the board would it have been?
Well, different members of the board would have understood different parts of it, I think. The nurse and medical directors would have understood the infection control aspects. So that the chief, who else? I can't think who else at the moment, but people would have been aware of the technical guidance notes. These are used all the time in NHS procurements and when we refurbish any areas. So these documents are not documents that no one has seen.
Could I ask you to have in front of you, please, within Bundle 3, Volume 1, page 815. Bundle 3, Volume 1, page 815.
Thank you.
Does this have in the top right-hand corner the Scottish Government Cell 19 2010 of the 2nd of June 2010? You see that?
Yes.
And then below that it's got the addressees, so for action, chief executives, NHS boards, chief executives, special health boards. Do you see that?
Yes.
And it states in the summary section, paragraph 1, this letter provides colleagues of a revised statement of the Scottish Government's policy on design quality for NHS Scotland. Do you see that?
Yes.
Okay. Now, if we look on to page 818, you'll see a document called A Policy on Design Quality for NHS Scotland from 2010. See that?
Yes.
Have you seen this document before?
Yes, I have. Scroll again.
If I could ask you to look on to page 828, please. And within the mandatory requirements to paragraph 2. So page 828. And then in the middle of the page, there's mandatory requirements. And then you see mandatory requirement 2, beginning each NHS Scotland board.
Yep.
So it says each NHS Scotland board must appoint a member of the NHS board to act as design champion, strategic level, to assist in articulating and promoting the board's design vision, and where not impractical, also a senior officer to act as supporting design champion at a technical level with knowledge and experience in capital investment procedures and expertise in technical matters. Do you see that?
Yes.
Were you aware of this requirement during the course of the project?
Yes.
Who was the design champion?
I can't remember who the board design champion was.
But was there a design champion on the board?
I think Ian Graham would have been the senior officer acting as a supporting design champion, I think. Could be wrong.
And who was Ian Graham?
Sorry, he was the head of capital, capital planning, head of capital in NHS Lothian. That's not his proper title. I'm sorry, I can't recall it.
And did he sit on the board of NHS?
No.
So in terms of who sat on the board acting as design champion, can you recall if there was a design champion on the board?
I can't remember.
And in terms of the actual role that a design champion would play, like, could you assist us with what's meant by assisting at a technical level? You know what that means?
Well, that would be, I would imagine, to make sure that we adhere to all the guidance documentation.
Final matter that I'd like to ask you, are you familiar with the term gateway reviews?
Yes.
What are gateway reviews?
Gateway reviews are reviews carried out by external bodies on a project at various stages to review progress and identify if any issues are arising that need to be dealt with.
And as Senior Responsible Officer, would you be involved in the Gateway Review, or would you receive the output of the Gateway Review?
You would be interviewed in the Gateway Review and you would also receive the output of it.
And in terms of the project, what assistance, assurance and support did you receive from Gateway Reviews?
When it was a standalone children's project, we had, I think, possibly 3 Gateway Reviews, and then the project changed to the joint project, and the reviews were carried out by SFT at that stage, I think. But prior to that, they were carried out by a group of people from NHS Scotland who had experience in different parts of projects.
So before the shift in funding model, it was done effectively in-house, and then your understanding is that after that, it was Scottish Futures Trust?
In-house being NHS Scotland, not NHS Lothian.
So what do you mean by NHS Scotland then, as
Well,
opposed to NHS
for
Lothian?
example, one of the technical people on the Gateway Reviews came from NHS Borders, so they didn't come from within. They weren't from within our board.
Understand. Thank you. Mrs Sansbury, I don't have any further questions for you, but Lord Brodie may have questions, or equally there may be applications from core participants.
Do any issues arise from Mr McGregor's questions? Directing my question to the legal representative present. Right, I take silence as a no. Mrs Sansbury, thank you very much for giving us your evidence. I have no further questions. You're accordingly free to go. So thank you very much for coming to assist. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, as we confirmed at the beginning, no more witnesses today, but we hope to begin again on Monday at 10 o'clock.
Yes, my lord.
With you, Mr McGregor, or...?
It will be Mr McClelland on Monday, my lord.
Right. So if there's any communication to be done over the weekend, Mr McClelland's probably the best point of contact.
Yes, my lord.
Right. Well, thank you very much for your attendance this week, and I look forward to see you on Monday.